everyone, welcome to the February 10th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we are looking ahead to Saturday's card at Tampa Bay Downs in Florida. They are running one of their Derby preps, the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis, where 20 qualifying points are on the line to the winner of that race, but there are 4 stakes as part of the late pick 5 sequence, which we will be discussing. The Sam F. Davis, the only graded stakes, but they're also running the Minaret and the Pelican for the sprinters, both female and male. The Suncoast, which has drawn a pretty interesting field of 3-year-old fillies. That one will serve as a Kentucky Oaks prep race, and then the sequence closes out with a maiden race after the Sam F. Davis, and that maiden event might be the most interesting race as part of the sequence, certainly the most wide open one. But Craig, I think one of the big things we have to tackle when we go through this sequence is there are 4 significant favorites in each of these 4 stakes races. They're all going to be under 2-1. Some of them might be odds on, and I think you have to decide if you want to stand against any of them or if you want to use or how deeply you want to go into these races using horses against those favorites.
Yeah, I think it's a tough card with these favorites because it's hard for me to make a strong case against any of them, really. I think they all have a good chance to win. I don't think they're invincible. A couple of them I might spread a little bit more than some others, but it's a sequence where I'm not going to spend a lot of money, and I think it's going to be wise. You're going to have to structure your tickets where you try to play them where you have to be right a couple times with the favorites, but you got to find a few horses. Otherwise, it's just not worth playing if you can't come up with a price.
Well, let's dive in to the first leg of this sequence. Race 7, it is the Minaret for the filly and mare sprinters going 6 furlongs. And I think we're going to have one of the biggest favorites in this sequence, Craig, in the number 5, Caramel Swirl. She's just a class above these horses, especially based on her last race when she was a good second in the Grade 1 Ballerina behind the female sprint champion, Goodnight Olive. She ran a really nice race that day, and it's not the first time that she's earned a speed figure that would make her pretty tough on this field, because as you go through her other competitors, there's just nobody else in here running those 110 plus TimeformUS speed figures that she's been throwing down pretty routinely.
I think she's probably the toughest one to go against in this whole sequence. Maybe I'll change my mind as we go through, but that was my initial thought handicapping. It's just, for me, it was tough to come up with some alternatives. I mean, that 120 speed figure she ran against Goodnight Olive certainly stacked up well when that one turned around to win the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. She's had some, she always runs well. She's never really thrown in a clunker. Her one time she didn't hit the board was at Charlestown, and that was when she was up in a fast pace, dueling with a horse who ultimately got disqualified for a drug overage. So she just always shows up, always runs her race, and even though she's coming off of I guess it's a 5-month, almost 6-month layoff, no reason to think she's not going to run because she's come off of layoffs before and run well. She ran well first time as a first-time starter, and Bill Mott he's training in really good form as well right now too. He seems to be throwing runners everywhere. So I'll see what you think of her. I mean, there are a couple horses I would like to talk about, but it's tough for me to get past her, and she would be the majority of my play in this race.
Yeah, there are obviously a lot of positives for Caramel Swirl. She's just more talented than the rivals that she's facing here. But if you are somebody who's inclined to take these formidable favorites on, you do want to do it when they're coming off a substantial layoff like this. That's typically when they're vulnerable. So that is a reason to maybe view her with a little bit of skepticism, just given the fact that she's going to be such a short price. She's 7-5 on the morning line. I wouldn't be surprised if she was 3-5 in this race, just because she does feel like such a standout on form and speed figures. Craig, there is a fast pace predicted here when you take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector, which is not a big surprise. There is a ton of speed in this race, many runners that want to be forwardly placed, and that's maybe another reason to like Caramel Swirl, because she is one of the few that's actually shown the ability to rally from off the pace, so that doesn't figure to affect her too much. We should note, she's never gone this short before. She's kind of one of those 7-furlong sprint specialists, and she's never gone as short as 6 furlongs. Given the pace signed on here, I'm not anticipating it's going to be much of a problem for her, but it is just something that might be worth mentioning. I'm not really against her, but there is one other horse that I'd want to use in here, and that's the number 8, Olivia Darling. I guess she'll be the second choice in this race or close to it. She just seems like she's coming into this in pretty good form. She obviously hasn't run nearly as fast as Caramel Swirl. Nobody else in this race has, but she's going out for a very dangerous barn. Jorge Delgado has been winning at a crazy clip at Tampa Bay Downs this year, 40%. She's coming off the best effort of her career when she was a powerful 7-length winner of that optional claiming race last time, and just feels like the kind of horse that if Caramel Swirl is a little rusty off the layoff, has an off day, this one's in razor sharp form and could be the beneficiary.
That's the other horse I was going to use. There were two other horses I gave a look to that would kind of be an alternative. No great shakes. They're both 5-1 on the morning line. The first one I'll go to was My Destiny, who's also in razor sharp form. She's a horse who's won 3 in a row. She's kind of traveled around the country a bit, went from Florida out to California, swung through Louisiana on her way back, and now back to Florida. She's been racking up the wins. But I think the pace is likely to harm her a lot more than it would Olivia Darling. She draws inside. I think she's more of a natural speed horse, one that's going to have to get up there and get the lead. She even won one of those 1,000-yard races at Los Al. Her last win at Delta was just a 5-furlong race. So like you, I prefer Olivia Darling. She would be the alternative to me. She's gotten really good since she changed barns, as you noted. Her speed figures seem to be ascending. She's still a pretty young 4-year-old filly, so I do think there is room to grow. So she would be the other horse I would use in here.
Yeah, and she's drawn well outside. Doesn't feel like a horse that necessarily needs the lead, even though she's had it in her last couple of starts. So I don't know if I'd make her my top pick in this race if we're talking in those terms. I'd probably use Caramel Swirl as an A and Olivia Darling as a B, but I'd like to go that thinly, just using those two in this first leg. Let's move on to the 8th race. We'll stick with the sprinters, but the male variety and the Pelican Stakes going that same 6-furlong distance. And once again, Craig, I think we're going to have a pretty substantial favorite here in the number 5, Sibelius. Maybe he won't be quite as short of a favorite as Caramel Swirl, but in some ways he might be more trustworthy because he has recency. He's been earning speed figures that, again, make him a class above this field, kind of a similar situation to what we just talked about with Caramel Swirl. And he's proven at the 6-furlong distance. So in some ways, he's almost more reliable than the favorite that we just talked about, though this is another race that features a ton of early speed, and he is one of those that wants to be forward.
He does. I mean, he has shown a little bit of versatility. He's drawn in the middle of the pack. He's run those big speed figures, as you said. So again, I had a hard time coming up with him, coming up with a lot of alternatives to him. His only real race he hasn't run lately was the Phoenix, and that's one of those races I just have no explanation for what happened that day. It came back a very slow race. A lot of horses didn't show up that day. It's been terrible coming out of it. So for me, I'm just putting a line through it. I think he's one that's going to be very strong in here. But I do think the pace could adversely affect him a little more than Caramel Swirl, who we talked about in the last race. It's one where, as you said, he does need to be up on the lead. It's a bigger field of 11 horses drawn in the middle. So if I was going to take him on, I would look at a couple other horses. Well, the first one I'll mention is the 2-horse Paco's Pico. He's a 4-year-old gelding who just seems to be moving in the right direction. He came back from a long layoff. He kind of vanished after May of his 3-year-old season. Came back toward the end of the 3-year-old season and has just been running in good form, running improved speed figures. Is a horse who doesn't need the lead. So he would be my main alternative. I'll see what you think about Sibelius before I go too far.
Yeah, I kind of what I was like teeing up at the intro. I feel like he might be a more likely winner than Caramel Swirl, even despite that pace scenario. He's just so good right now, and also he's getting the Lasix back. And I don't like to make too much of that, but he really did come to form and run some of his best races with Lasix last summer when he won that optional claimer at Saratoga, and then basically repeated that performance in the Light the Fuse at Pimlico. And maybe he was a little disappointing in the Phoenix when he lost as the favorite after that and then again in the Bet on Sunshine. But it's certainly not going to hurt him. Getting the Lasix back, cutting back to 6 furlongs is another positive thing for him. He's run some of his best races going that far. And like you were saying, he's not a horse that needs to be in front, even though he's shown as the leader on the pace projector. So I just think he makes way too much sense in this race to take a big stand against him. I hear you with Paco's Pico. If you're looking for a horse that can come from just off the pace, he seems like one of the candidates to do so. Maybe another one would be the number 10 Gatsby, who I can't say that I love his overall form, but believe it or not, he has the best TimeformUS late pace rating in the field, and kind of interesting that he's shown up in sharing fourth on the pace projector. It's rare to see a horse with the best late pace rating that close to the early pace when you're looking at the pace projector and comparing them to the pace figure, the pace ratings of these horses. It's just a situation where there are no confirmed deep closers in this race that are really of the caliber to be considered win candidates. So I think that's why you see such a situation with Gatsby. And one other horse that I would mention, Craig, that I don't really know what to do with, I'll probably use him just because he does have upside, is the number 7 Uphold the Law. Obviously, he's 4 for 5 in his career, so he's more lightly raced than a lot of these horses. Came off the layoff last time at Fairgrounds, and I liked the way he finished off that race. He's a little light on speed figures compared to some others in this field, but he does feel like one that, as a newly turned 5-year-old, a very lightly raced 5-year-old, he might still have another step forward in him. So I would use him as a B or C type.
Yeah, he was the other horse for me, Uphold the Law. I couldn't really get beyond him, and it's for the reason you said. He's lightly raced. He's won 4 out of 5. His last race was his best speed figure. His final time figure that day was actually a 1:14. So I think that's about probably the second best in the field. We don't really know his running style, even though he's been close up all the time. He's got a lot of blue fractions in his PPs. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was one that could lay off the pace a little bit. And he does draw towards the outside, so I wouldn't have any problem with him sitting third or fourth. But I'm with you. Sibelius is going to be really tough. That 123 speed figure last time really stands out. And it's actually looking like the Mr. Prospector was a pretty strong race. Only 3 horses have run back out of it, but all the horses have improved their speed figure either just a little bit, one just a little bit when Dean Delivers ran third in the Hooper, stretching out, and 2 others, Prevalence, also in the Hooper, improved his speed figure quite a bit, and No K No, who's in this race, drawn to the inside, jumped up quite a bit out of that one too. He was beaten 16 lengths that day and came back to run a good second in an allowance, so I don't think that race Sibelius ran was a fluke, because he really trounced that field, and it's proven a strong race.
I should mention, we didn't bring up the second choice on the morning line, the number 3 Willie Boy. I imagine this is a horse that is just not your cup of tea, Craig, because he's a little bit light on the speed figures, and he has a bit of a reputation after finishing third in the Grade 1 Vanderbilt last summer behind Jackie's Warrior. That was a Grade 1 where really only Jackie's Warrior was the Grade 1 caliber horse in that race. Everybody else was just kind of making the race go for that star. And since then, Willie Boy was not a factor in the Breeders' Cup and was a disappointing loser as the 1-2 favorite last time. I guess cutting back to 6 furlongs is going to help him as opposed to the 7 last time, but if he's near that 3-1 morning line, that's just too short for me.
Same. He was a horse who was somehow in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I can't figure that one out. I guess it was because of that Vanderbilt. His speed figures were a lot better. The last 2 haven't been all that great. You could say maybe the last one was hurt because of the pace. It was a slow pace, but he was right up on that pace. He just seems like a horse who maybe is a little bit over the top to me, and the 3-1 really turned me off. If he was anywhere near that price, I wouldn't want any parts of him.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, the 3-year-old portion of this pick 5, and it is the Suncoast Stakes, race 9, going 1 mile and 40 yards for the 3-year-old fillies, Kentucky Oaks prospects here. And Craig, we did a longer video on this race on DRF's YouTube channel that you can check out. We went through all of the contenders, and we agreed. Wonder Wheel, she just looks like a deserving favorite in here. Obviously, last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies winner, last year's 2-year-old filly champion. She really passed every test. Everything they threw at her last year, she was able to handle. Showed real versatility to win that Breeders' Cup last time. And if she takes the natural step forward from 2 to 3, she's supposed to kick off her 3-year-old campaign with a win.
She is. There's obviously this field came up pretty strong. Maybe this changed to the 20 points earlier on in past years. I believe this was just a 10-point race. We're getting horses like Wonder Wheel showing up and Julia Shining, who comes out of the Grade Two Demoiselle with a win that day. So this is for a listed stakes race. It's a pretty strong group. I don't think it's going to be a walkover for Wonder Wheel. But I do think she's going to be pretty tough to beat. This is probably the one of the three we've talked about. I would maybe take on a little bit more than the others, but I also get the feeling maybe I'm just stretching, trying to find plays in here because I have no real knocks on Wonder Wheel.
Yeah, and I know when we talked about this race when we recorded that video yesterday, you were a little bit against the other horse that's likely to take money in here, the number 9, Julia Shining. I mean, she kind of has co-top billing with Wonder Wheel just based on her reputation from last year and also the perceived potential here because she is out of that excellent Dam Dreaming of Julia. She is the younger full sister to Malatha, last year's Breeders' Cup Distaff winner and champion older female. So Julia Shining definitely has some big shoes to fill. She's on her way there, 2 for 2 in her career, a Demoiselle winner, but I think the jury's still out as with regarding the quality of that Demoiselle, and her speed figures just don't put her in the same league as these, so she's going to have to take a big step forward.
Yeah, one of the things we show in that Timeform US now is that new tool, the finish projector in the mobile PPs, and he's basically last, I think, or next to last. I can't remember what it was, and it's because of those slow speed figures. And nothing when you look back at the Demoiselle would tell you that that speed figure was wrong. Four of the horses have run back. They've basically run the same speed figure. I think they've all increased by like 1 or 2 points, no more than that. So it would tell you that speed figure was pretty accurate. Doesn't mean Julia Shining can't improve. I certainly think that she will. She's by one of, if not the best trainer in the game. Todd Pletcher, he certainly knows what he's doing. I'm just really leery of this turn back in distance, the Demoiselle at 1.125 miles, and I know there's no other options right now. You have to turn back. But it's a pretty far turn back from 1.125 miles all the way back to 1 mile and 40 yards. And I just have a feeling she's going to get lost a little bit early. I have no doubt she'll be running late and making up ground. I just think it's going to come too late. And at a short price, I don't want any parts of her. I think even though Wonder Wheel will take some money, I won't be surprised if these two are almost co favorites. Maybe a 6-5, 7-5 situation, something like that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you're getting much of a price on Julia Shining Julia Shining in here. I will say she made awfully hard work of her races last year. She was just a lazy type that took a lot of riding to get into her races. I mean, last time Luis Saez got quite the workout in the Demoiselle. I mean, he was basically in a full-out drive with her for the last 7 furlongs of that race, and she never looked like she was getting there, basically, until she did. Just a horse that doesn't travel well in her races. And based on that, I've watched a couple of her recent workouts, and I will say she's looked a little bit more willing in the morning. So you do want to see these horses start to figure the game out, and there clearly is natural ability here. She's got a huge stride on her for a horse of her stature. She's not nearly as big as Malathot, but she covers a lot of ground. So I agree, more distance is going to be her friend. I think we saw that in the Demoiselle, so this slight cutback, it is a bit of a concern. I just see some mental progression here, and I feel like she's going to run okay in this race. Whether or not that's good enough to beat a horse like Wonder Wheel or some others in here, that remains to be seen. And I don't think she's going to offer sufficient value for me to make a big push in her direction. But I'm not completely against her, is what I'm trying to say. And Craig, among the bigger prices beyond these two favorites, I know each of us was kind of interested in one of those. And I think you had some interest in the number 2, Opus 42.
Yeah, Opus 42 comes out of a narrow win in the Gasparilla where she was able to hold off another horse in this field, Charlie's Wish. I mean, they were only a nose apart. But I actually like Opus 42 quite a bit more than Charlie's Wish. I got the impression that she's the more likely of the two to handle the two turns. She has more tactical speed. And Charlie's Wish, I just got that feeling watching her earlier races that she's a sprinter through and through. She did make an adjustment where she was actually the one making up ground last time and really made it close at the wire. But she also backed up in all of her prior or couple prior sprints before that. And just kind of get the feeling that she's at most the closing sprinter type. I don't see that run being extended to 2 turns. And I like what I saw from Opus 42. She ran a 97 speed figure that day, which isn't all that far off a Wonder Wheel. Wonder Wheel only ran a 99 in the winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. It's not like it's a huge gap back to her. I'm not saying she's her equal or anything, but at a way bigger price, she's one that I'd want to have on my tickets. And the other horse you kind of talked me into yesterday, I'll let you expand on, but I know you kind of like Champagne Calling in here.
Yeah, I see now she's listed at 30 to 1 in the morning line. I'd certainly be enticed at that kind of price. She's just a lightly raced filly, Champagne Calling, who I think is really bred to and physically looks like one that could take a step forward going the 2-turn dirt route distance. She won going the 7 furlongs when she broke her maiden last time and was just staying on at the end of that race like a horse that's going to continue to go on with added ground. She's by Empire Maker. There's stamina on the bottom side. And Ian Wilkes is just the kind of trainer that gets these horses to improve with experience. So I think she has upside here, and I think it's a good sign that they're taking this shot with her. And as opposed to some others that haven't run quite as fast yet and are going to be shorter prices, I think she's pretty interesting in here. So she's definitely a horse that I would use in exactas and trifectas behind Wonder Wheel. And she's also a horse that I would use in a pick 5 sequence as a B or C type.
Yeah, and I mean, there's others in here. I mean, I already talked about Charlie's Wish. There's a few others that have run 90 type, 90 plus speed figures. I just think it's going to be a little too much to overcome. The one horse I guess we should talk about, I don't particularly like in here, and I don't believe you did either, if memory serves, is the 8 Ticker Tape Home. She's a horse who's actually picked on top in the Timeform US Power Picks. That's largely because of the speed figures. The problem with her is all of her speed figures, and the last 3 are all triple digits, have come on synthetic or turf, and they've all come around 1 turn.
Yeah, she's not for me. It looks like more of a turf synthetic horse, just based on pedigree and what I've seen from her. I think distance is also a huge question for her, and I find it hard to believe Mark Cassidy would be running a horse like this that he thinks is going to love the dirt against his top Kentucky Oaks prospect, Wonder Wheel, as the trainer of both horses. So yeah, she wasn't for me either. Let's move on to the feature race on this Tampa Bay Downs Saturday card, the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis, this being the Kentucky Derby prep that leads into their Tampa Bay Derby. 20 Kentucky Derby qualifying points on the line to the winner of this race, and it's a pretty interesting field of 12 runners, Craig. We do have yet another clearly defined favorite here in the number 7 WNL, the winner of the Remsen Stakes, and we talked a little bit about Julia Shining winning the Demoiselle. There is some question about the quality of the Remsen, but at least that race got a much higher speed figure, and he does come in as the fastest horse in this race, but he also has some questions to answer. Both of his victories are over sloppy sealed racetracks. There is potentially some rain predicted on Saturday at Tampa, but I mean, it's unclear if it's going to be quite as wet as it was at Aqueduct in his last couple of starts, so he has questions to answer, and there are certainly other options in this large competitive field.
Right, of the favorites we talked about, maybe we're kind of going in descending order where I don't think he's maybe as likely as some of the others. Definitely more question marks because, as you know, both of those wins have come over sloppy tracks at Aqueduct. The speed figures are good, but sloppy tracks are always going to be a question until they show it on the fast. That said, I don't know if you remember, in the Remsen, I actually really liked his race when he broke his maiden. I talked about it that I didn't just think it was the sloppy track, so I don't want to totally write it off to that because just because he caught another sloppy track, he's looked really good in his races. The horse he beat, Arctic Arrogance, last time, I think he's pretty good as well. And there was a huge gap back to third that day. As you say, the speed figure is the best in the field, so I don't really have any knocks against him as well. Just a few more questions than some of the others.
Yeah, I don't mind him as a racehorse. He's shown some likable attributes. I think he finishes up his races pretty strongly, and I liked the grit that he showed getting it done last time. Still, though, sometimes these horses, when they just look so obvious in a large field like this, they tend to get bet lower than they really should. And this is the kind of race where if you like a bigger price, you might land on a horse that does slip through the cracks and not take the money that he's really supposed to, because I don't think that WNL is so likely to win this race that he's supposed to be under 2-1, and I feel like he probably will get bet that way. So there were definitely some others that I want to consider, Craig, and I'll just bring up some horses and you can maybe comment on them. I mean, one of the interesting runners in here is the number 9 Champion's Dream, who used to be in the Danny Gargan barn. Danny Gargan, of course, being the trainer of WNL. He was a trainer switch, same owners, to Mark Cassie in the Pasco Stakes last time, and was beaten as the favorite that day. Maybe he wants to go a little farther than that, though I still question whether 2 turns is going to be this horse's best distance. But at least he does have some prior triple-digit TimeformUS speed figures that could put him in the mix. Todd Pletcher has entered one horse in this race, the number 11 Litigate, who certainly wasn't flattered by the performance of Cyclone Mischief, who beat him last time when that one came back in the Holy Bull and was very disappointing as the favorite. So make of that what you will, but he's a horse that has some upside in this race. And also, we've got some horses coming out of a Tampa allowance race, Prairie Hawk and Groveland, who faced off on January 13th. The former trained by Safi Joseph, a horse that seems like he's improved with added distance. So there are other places to go in this race, Greg, other logical horses if you're looking beyond the favorite WNL.
Yeah, there are a few. I'll talk about a couple that you mentioned. Champion's Dream, I'm more on the he's a sprinter type. I mean, this would maybe be pushing the limit for him, even though he's by Justify out of a Tappet mare. He just, to me, hasn't really looked like a 2-turn horse. He's yet to try 2 turns, obviously. His 2-mile races both came at Aqueduct, where it's a 1-turn. And what worries me even more about him is the outside post position, which I think could be trouble in here. This is another race we have shown with a fast pace. And I'm not so much concerned with the fast pace. That tends to crop up a little more in these 3-year-old races because we got a lot of lightly raced horses. A lot of them still have maiden wins where they either went wire to wire or right up near the front end. What concerns me more is how far back he is shown in this field, which means there's quite a bit of other horses who have shown more speed than him. And from that outside post, I do think it's going to be tough for him. One horse you didn't mention who's kind of caught my eye a little bit is the 4-horse Laver. He comes in here for George Arnold, who I've respected for a while. He's a guy who's been winning races for as long as I can remember. I really liked what I saw when he broke his maiden at Churchill back in November. I thought it was a big race that day. Ran a nice 102 speed figure. He kind of regressed off a really short layoff, but that was kind of a weird race when you watch it. The pace was pretty quick. He was 3 wide around the turn. Didn't really have any finish, but he's one that I might be willing to give him another chance. The allowance race at Tampa you mentioned, that's one I don't know what to do with that one. The pace was so ridiculously slow that day. Prairie Hawk set the pace. I'm not even sure he's really a front runner type. I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to tuck in behind horses here, get a good stalking trip or covered up trip and, look for some room in the stretch. I think he will be fine. And I don't take that 91 speed figure he ran, which is knocked down quite a bit by the pace. The final time figure was a 98. So of the ones I've talked about so far, he is one I actually like quite a bit in here. I like his draw. I think he's going to just work out a good trip from that inside post. And that said, I don't want to write off Groveland either because he just sat second, couldn't quite catch Prairie Hawk. But again, that race, I don't know what to make of it. I think the horses that ran 1-2 are better than what the speed figure shows.
Yeah, I also have Prairie Hawk in my mix. I liked his maiden win too back when he came from just off the pace and reeled in a runoff leader that day, and he finished up to win that race much easier than the margin would suggest. And yeah, last time, I don't know what to make of that race. It was just, they walked early, they sprinted home, nobody really closed. I'm not going to hold it against him because he'd held on to win that race. Just feels like there might be some improvement here. He's come back and worked well, so given the fact that he's drawn such an advantageous inside post position, he is one that I want to use. I would also use the number 3, Classic Legacy. He's very light on speed figures. He's never run above a 90 TimeformUS speed figure before, so that's a little bit of a negative. But he is a half-brother art collector, so there's some pedigree here. He's supposed to get better with added distance. He really wasn't beating much of a field last time at Aqueduct, but it just feels like the kind of horse that does have potential to move forward for Bill Mott, a trainer who you've already noted has been having quite a run of success recently with his dirt horses. But Craig, I want to touch on one more horse, the horse that I actually made my top pick in this race, and I hope he's as big a price as he is on the morning line, because that makes me even more excited about him. And that's the number 6 Classic Car Wash, the other Mark Casse horse in this race. To me, there's really nothing wrong with this horse's last 2 races. I know that he wasn't beating as strong a field when he broke his Maiden 2-back in that optional claiming affair, but he was pretty impressive that day on the dirt. I mean, he got shuffled back a little bit on the turn. As soon as Amicio Jaramillo moved him to the outside, though, he quickly moved by the leaders and ran off to a pretty impressive victory. And then he came back last time on the Tapeta surface. I'm not going to say that he's some Tapeta specialist just because he won last time. To me, he ran just as well on that surface as he did on the dirt in his prior start. And yes, he had the pace in his favor, but I like the way he finished up that race. And it just feels like the kind of horse that even though he went to the lead last time, he doesn't need to be in front. He's comfortable coming from off the pace. And maybe he's going to be perceived as of a lower class than these because he's not as expensive. He broke his Maiden in one of those optional claiming races. He doesn't, he's not the blue blood that some others are, being by Noble Bird. But I think he's pretty interesting and is the kind of horse that could fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. Maybe some people get turned off by that synthetic race, but he already showed he can handle the dirt, and he handled it just fine when he broke his Maiden. Winning easy, like you said. Maybe it wasn't the best field, but I mean, it's hard to pass the visual that he showed. It was very good. And that allowance race on the synth last time, the runner-up in that race has already come back to run a much improved speed figure on the turf. So I think that horse that he beat is pretty good that day. And he didn't just beat him, he beat him pretty easily. You could say he did set a slow pace, but the other horse was right up there, had every chance to get by him and didn't even come close. He was actually running away from him in the stretch. So I've got no problems with him. The good news about this race is because we went pretty short, I think we're both going really short in the first 3 legs. Maybe it gives us some more leverage in these last 2 because of the favorites, WNL, yeah, he can win. I'm with you though. Anything under 2-1 would seem like overkill, and he does have more questions than the others. So I think this is the race to take your swings.
Yeah, and I like Classic Car Wash quite a bit to use him on par with W&L in this race, and the others would be more backup types. But I'm going to go for that other Mark Casse trainee in this Sam F. Davis. And Craig, let's close things out with the last leg of this sequence, race 11. And this is clearly the most competitive race in this sequence. It's a maiden event for the 3-year-old fillies going a mile and a 16th. And there is a lot going on in this race. We've got interesting horses with experience. We've got some well-bred first-time starters for very dangerous barns. And maybe that's where we should start, because we've seen over the past few years, Craig, trainers like Chad Brown and Christophe Clement unveil some pretty good horses at Tampa Bay Downs. The fact that, they're shipping these horses from their South Florida base is not a negative sign at all. Sometimes they like the turf course better at Tampa. So when you see horses like Cirilla by Kingman and Financial Advice by Wooten Bassett that they're running at Tampa, that's not a negative at all.
No, it's not. And it's exactly what you said from the reading I've done. They really like this turf course at Tampa Bay, and they want to get their better prospects on it, as opposed to Gulfstream doesn't seem to be as in high a favor. I know it's a new course at Gulfstream, seems to be doing well, but this is your more traditional turf course. It's pretty lush. They do run fast times, but you can definitely come from off the pace and win. So I think the natural inclination when I looked at this race was to go to those 2 first-time starters. I wanted to dig deeper because, as you said, there's at least 3 horses in this field who have run 90 type, well into the 90 type Timeform US speed figures, which is usually going to be able to win one of these maiden races. But my plays are going to go mostly through those 2 first-time starters because I just respect those trainers so much. They're both very good with first-time starters, and I doubt they're sending horses they don't think can win.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just read off some stats that back up our perceptions. Christophe Clement, over the past 5 years with first-time starters at Tampa on the turf, 10 for 47, $2.54 ROI. Chad Brown, first time starters in turf routes at Tampa. He is 13 for 36. That's a 36% win rate with a $2.01 ROI. So the fact that that ROI is even positive for Chad Brown, just given the way he gets bet at Tampa, it confirms that he has a lot of success here with these types of runners. He's got two in here, Financial Advice and Lover's Rock. The latter is a homebred for Peter Brandt. It feels like the live one is the Klarovich firster, Financial Advice, who's, I think, listed as the morning line favorite in this race. And Wooten Bassett, a European sire that I know Chad Brown and these connections have had some success with already. Financial Advice is out of a dam. That's a half-sister to a horse named Recoletos, who was a multiple Group 1 winner on the turf in France. Cyrilla, who is a daughter of Kingman for the Christophe Clement stable. This horse is out of a dam that has produced 8 winners internationally. She's a half to a turf stakes winner in the U.S., Mirage. So there's real pedigree behind Cyrilla and Financial Advice, in addition to the fact that they are going out for some dangerous barns. So I agree. I would want to use those horses. But there are some horses with experience, like you said, who have run well. And it could be one of those situations where the public goes crazy for the firsters, and maybe some of those capable, experienced runners go off at decent prices, because there's nothing wrong with the number 6 Jupiter's Moon, who in her only turf start on debut ran really well for Tony Dutrow. She had a terrible start that day, got steadied badly, had to make a run around the field around the far turn, and finished pretty well for second. She's not a dirt horse when she tried it last time. I'm not going to put too much stock in that race, but getting back to the turf, if she takes a step forward, she could be pretty tough in here.
Yeah, she of the horses who I've ran, I would use the 2 first-time starters as A's, and I totally agree with you about the 2 Chad Browns. I mean, you can see it on the morning line, you can see it on the riders named. I think the 5 is the much more fancy one and the one I'm going to use, but Juniper's Moon, that first debut at Aqueduct was really good, and as you said, she had trouble. The pace was slow. All the fractions are in slow or in blue, and she was at the back of the pack, dead last. Got all the way up for second. It's hard to say how good that field was. I mean, we've seen some runbacks from it, but most of them have come on dirt, so it's a little tough at this point. But it felt like a decent field to me. So of the ones who have run, I like her the most. I guess the 12 horse will take some interest. The Graham Motion train horse who's run 3 speed figures all in the 90s. I do worry about that post position, and I worry about the fact that basically she's backed up in the stretch every time, or at least not been making up any ground. So she's the one I don't really want, who some might be leaning to.
Yeah, that 12 horse, the girl from Ireland, boy, has she been unlucky. 3 races in a row now, she's drawn the outside post position in an 11-horse field, a 9-horse field, and now in a 12-horse field. So I think she's better than she looks because she's gotten wide trips in each of those last 2 starts, but you have to feel like she has another wide trip coming to her in this large field. So, I mean, she's a little tough to take, having gotten unlucky at the post position draw once again. Craig, in races like this, you know that I love to do some pedigree work and find some hidden form in the pedigree that horses might be able to transfer to turf. So I've got a couple of those types that I just want to mention. The number 2 Sea Witch is switching over to turf for the first time for trainer Tom Albertrani. I think they wanted to get her on it last time. That race was rained off. She's by Honor Code, who's a decent enough turf influence, but there's plenty of turf on the dam side. She's a half-sister to Soluble, who was a turf winner in this country. I think even a horse that ended up running over jumps. The dam is a full sister to Breeders' Cup turf winner Scirocco, so there really is turf pedigree on the dam side there, and she's at least shown some tactical speed in her races where she might be able to get forward in this large field. That could be a positive for her. And the other horse at a gigantic price that I just have to mention is the number 9 Coffee House. I know she hasn't done much running on the dirt so far, but this horse has much more of a turf pedigree. By Medaglia d'Oro, the dam won on the turf, was a lightly raced horse who had ability. She's been a producer primarily in Europe, but this horse, the dam produced a horse that was second in the Group 1 Racing Post Trophy overseas in England. So there really is a lot of turf pedigree here, and watching her races, she moves like a turf horse. I think she's going to move up on this surface. There's a question about how good she is overall, but she's the kind of horse that is just going to get completely lost in the wagering here and be a huge price. So I have to at least mention her as one that I'm going to include on my tickets.
Yeah, it's almost a shame for horses like that they catch what looks like a really strong field. Probably worth using on your tickets. I guess it depends how you can construct them, but again, we've definitely left ourselves some room the spread, I think, in these races. But if these horses run 6th and 7th in here, beating 3 or 4 lengths, they might be worth looking at next time because there's some pedigree. But I just have the hunch this is going to be a very strong maiden race.
Well, Craig, let's do a brief recap. And I'll just say, I'll throw it over to you in a sec, but I just want to say this is the kind of sequence where I want to avoid falling into that trap where I ended up constructing a ticket and looking back at it and seeing that I'm just using a bunch of first and second choices in every single leg, because I know those aren't the kind of plays that really interest us in general. And even though we're handicapping the sequence, and it's the kind of sequence that I think a lot of people are looking for us to handicap looking ahead to this weekend with some of the biggest stakes races being run at Tampa, we have to be real with the people that are listening and say, maybe we're not recommending the best play if we just like a lot of favorites in all of these races. And I know that, some of the races that we've been leaning towards these obvious horses that are going to be taking a lot of money. So you might want to get a little bit more constructive and going with a scalpel when you're putting together these tickets to make sure that you are favoring those combinations that at least figure to pay more than what you're putting in.
Right. In a situation like this where there's probably going to be 4 heavily bet favorites, I would say less than 2-1. Not sure about the last race, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Chad Brown horse is favored and the Christophe Clement horse's second choice. So it's going to be one where, yeah, I want to keep those tickets to a minimum. There's nothing that says you can't play 4 or 5 cheap tickets, and just make sure you don't have more than, I would say, 2, maybe 3 favorites max, and maybe 1 second choice at the most. And you just want to make sure you get paid if you get it right. Otherwise, what's the point? And I do think we threw out some opinions on some price horses that you could use playing vertical plays in some of these races. I know, like Champagne Calling, 30-1 on the morning line. That speaks to me because, yeah, maybe the favorite can win, but if you get a horse like that in the exacta or trifecta, you can still get paid.
Yeah, and let's just do a brief recap. I don't think we have to talk about all the favorites because people kind of know that we've already highlighted who they are, their merits, but let's just briefly go through and recap some of the horses at bigger prices that we might want to use as like B or C types in this sequence.
Yeah, in the Minaret, the Philly Sprint. The other horse I would probably use is Olivia Darling. As you said, she's in really good form. She's in the red hot Jose Delgado barn. She draws outside, gets a good post position. So she would be the one alternative to me. In the Pelican Stakes, I kind of like Paco's Pico. I think he can work out a good trip from the inside. I'm trying as I grease through here, see if there wasn't a whole lot else I don't think I like.
I think we both liked Uphold the Law a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, the 7 Uphold the Law, who similarly has won 4 out of 5, speed figures progressing in the right direction, drawn towards the outside. So he's one I would add on to my tickets a bit. In the Suncoast, Opus 42 was my alternative to Wonder Wheel. I didn't want to go too deep into that. I didn't like the other Mark Cass horse. And Champagne Calling, obviously, the 30-1. I think that's pretty hard to pass up. In the Davis, that's the one race I would spread a little bit. WNL, if I have him on top, it would have to be, like I said, on tickets where we don't have all the other favorites, because what is really the point in there? You kind of talked me in the classic car wash. I like Prairie Hawk quite a bit. Lever would be like a seahorse to me. And even the horse who ran second, the Prairie Hawk, Groveland, I don't think he's a total throwout. And then, as I said, but the last race, I do like the 2 first-time starters, but I like the Tony Dutrow horse, Juniper's Moon, as well. And if I can afford it, I would throw in your pedigree, please.
Yeah, I don't want to have to recap the first 2 legs because I think Craig and I were on the exact same page with the horses that we liked. In the Suncoast, yeah, Craig mentioned I'm a little bit interested in the 4 Champagne Calling. Like I said earlier, she's the kind of horse I would use in exactas behind Wonder Wheel, and I would use her as a B or C type in that pick 5 sequence. I like Classic Car Wash quite a bit in the Sam F. Davis. I'd want quite a bit of my play to go through him. I'd also have some play going through Prairie Hawk, Classic Legacy, maybe a little bit to Groveland because they all figure to be decent enough prices. And these last two legs, I think, are the ones where you do want to start to emphasize those bigger prices a little bit more, because it does feel like these are ones that, the favorites don't necessarily have to win these two, whereas earlier in the day, I wouldn't want to be investing a lot against the horses that do look pretty formidable at those shorter prices. And then the last leg, I respect the first-time starters. If the public is going crazy for them, I mean, obviously you can't see it before you bet the pick 5 sequence, but you could have an idea about it. Maybe this is one where you do want to emphasize some of those bigger prices with experience a little bit more. And for me, those are Juniper's Moon, as well as, we didn't mention this horse, but the number 8, Just a Splash, has a little bit of going for her. The other Donny Dutrow horse, the Girl from Ireland, and especially those two first-time turfers, the number 2, Sea Witch, and the number 9, Coffee House, who I think are very interesting. They're the kind of horses that I would just place win bets on regardless of whether I'm alive to them, because they both figure to be generous prices, and I think they have some real upside moving to this turf surface. Well, Craig, that wraps up this pick 5 sequence. Hopefully this is one that people don't have to go too deep to get through it. I think it's not one of the most expensive races sequences that we've talked about. But regardless of all of that, I'm looking forward to seeing how these Oaks and Derby preps play out. We're starting to see the picture take shape a little bit, and we should get a lot of answers with regard to the Oaks Trail after that Suncoast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this weekend. I haven't looked around the country too much to see what else is going on. I think Tampa is kind of the focus, but it's a really good card, and I think we're going to see some good performances. And like I said earlier in the show, I do think changing the points format has maybe changed the landscape a little bit with these early prep races, because we've seen some good horses show up earlier than we have been in recent seasons.
Well, Craig and I will look forward to discussing these races next week on the TimeformUS Pacecast, as well as all the other stakes racing that we find interesting from around the country. Everybody, thanks for listening to the forecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast coming up next week.